It's 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in Umoja Estate, Nairobi. A woman, I'll call her Mama Jaden, because that's what her son's classmate call her. And at this point, it's more of a job title than a nickname. Staring at her WhatsApp message from her son's teacher. The message reads, "Kindly note, the Grade 5 Environmental Activities projects on water conservation in my community is due Thursday. Learners are expected to present a model, a poster, and a written report. Materials are the parents' responsibility." You heard that right. Materials are the parents' responsibility. 6 words. That's it. That's the brief. That is the entirety of the operational instruction given to a single mother of 2 who works at a salon in Buruburu and takes her matatu home every 7 p.m. By Wednesday afternoon, Mama Jaden has spent 1,450 shillings on materials for a single school project. For context, that's roughly what she makes in a day and a half at the salon. She still doesn't fully understand what a learner-led model is, but she knows this. At midnight, she's on cutting cardboard, printing images she found on Google at a cyber cafe in Donholm, and gluing together something that is supposed to demonstrate her 10-year-old's competency in environmental stewardship. Her 10-year-old, meanwhile, he has been asleep since 9 because he's 10. And here's the part that will stay with me. When Mama Jaden drops the project at school the next morning, she sees another parent arriving in a Prado. That parent's child is carrying a project that looks like it was assembled by an architectural firm. Because it probably was. The parent hired someone. Mama Jaden glued things herself at midnight. Both projects will be assessed on the same rubric. Both will contribute to the child's continuous assessment. This is not a story about a lazy parent. This is not a story about a bird teacher. This is a story about a system that transferred state obligation onto kitchen tables and called it parental engagement. Welcome to the Kenyan week that was. I'm DUI. Receipts over vibes always. Today, we are doing something we've been building towards for quite some time. We're going to talk about school. Not the nostalgic version, not the back in my day we walked barefoot and turned out fine version. The real one, the one where your child or your children come home with a list of things to buy and you do not know whether you're funding an education or running a small procurement office from your living room. Today's episode is called CBC versus 844, How Kenya Broke School. And before anyone accuses me of being anti-reform or pro the old system, let me be very clear about the thesis. CBC did not fail because Kenyans are resistant to change. It is failing because Kenya tried to run a Scandinavian education model on a budget and infrastructure designed for survival. That's the thesis. That's what we're here to prove today. This episode is not nostalgia for 844. That system had its own body count. We'll get into that. But what we are going to do today is lay out with receipts what CBC promised and what it is actually delivering. Who is paying for the gap between those two and who is paying for the gap between those two things? And what's fixing and what perhaps fixing this system would actually require if anyone in this government was serious enough about it. We're going to talk to the parents doing midnight homework runs, the teachers drowning in assessment paperwork in classrooms with 60 plus children, the JSS students who still don't understand what a pathway means, and the publishing economy that is quietly making money from all this confusion. So grab your tea. This one runs long. Let's go. To understand why we're here, you have to understand what CBC was supposed to be. Because on paper, and I want to be honest about this, on paper, this is not a bad idea. It's arguably a good idea. The problem was never the blueprint. The problem was pretending the blueprint could build itself. So Let's start with the design. The competency-based curriculum was introduced in 2017 by Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, or KICD, as a replacement to the 844 system that had been in place since 1985. This new structure is what they call the 2633. Let me say that again. It's what they called the 2633. 2 years of pre-primary, 6 years of primary, 3 years of junior secondary school, and then 3 years of senior secondary school. The philosophy was simple and in principle, very sound. Instead of teaching children to memorize content and regurgitate it in a high-stakes exam, CBC would focus on building competencies: critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communication, digital literacy, and most effectively, self-efficacy. Learning would be learner-centered. Assessments would be continuous rather than one single do-or-die exam day. And that would have been brilliant. And at a senior secondary, children or students would choose specialized pathways, STEM, social sciences, the arts, and sports, based on their aptitudes and interests. The official promise. The Basic Education Curriculum Framework, published by the KICD in 2017, laid out a version of education that nurtures every learner's potential. The government positioned CBC as aligned with Kenyan Vision 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. It was meant to fix two biggest problems with 844: the exam obsession that turned schools into cramming factories, and the disconnect between what children learned and what the economy actually needed. And look, if you compare this to what was happening under 844, you can understand the appeal. Under 844, a child's entire education trajectory, their secondary school placement, their shot at a university, arguably their economic future, was determined by how they performed on one single KCPE exam and one single KCPE exam. One day, one exam, and that is it. CBC said no more. Assessments would be blended. 40% of a learner's final grade would come from continuous school-based assessments across multiple years, and 60% from a summative national assessment. The Kenya National Exam Council would oversee it. Results would be reported in competency bands: exceeding expectations, meeting expectations, approaching expectations, below expectation, rather than the raw marks and cutthroat rankings. And for those who are old like me, we remember, getting your D's, your E's, your B's, and hopefully seeing other students out there doing the Lord's work and getting A's and A minuses from all the paperwork they had been given by their teachers. Now, here's where gaps open. Everything I just described: learner-centered pedagogy, continuous assessment, pathway specialization, competency development, requires 3 things that Kenya does not have in sufficient supply. Number 1, infrastructure. 2, trained teachers. And most importantly, money. Let me illustrate this with a real scenario. There's a teacher. This composite is drawn from multiple accounts documented in academic research and media reporting. A public primary school teacher in a rural sub-county. She was trained under the 844 system. She has been teaching for 14 years. When CBC was introduced, she was sent to a 5-day training workshop. 5 days to fundamentally relearn completely how to teach. In the workshop, what do you think she learned? She was introduced to concepts like formative assessment, learner's portfolio, and competency rubrics. The facilitator moved so quickly, and the materials were so dense. By the day 3, the facilitator was still explaining the theory behind CBC, while the teachers needed to know what to do on Monday morning when they walked into a classroom of 63 children, with 12 different textbooks between all of them. She returned to her school. She tried. She's still trying. But as the Teachers Service Commission itself has acknowledged, many teachers are not adequately equipped for CBC implementation. A 2025 academic study put it in starkly. Only about 12% of school heads initially felt capable of mentoring their staff in the new curriculum. 12%. As in, we're talking about E territory. or below expectations as CBC would have it. So here we are. CBC promised Finland. What it delivered was a new set of paperwork requirements layered on top of the same broken infrastructure, same overcrowded classroom, same teacher shortages, same underfunding, new expectations. That's not reform. That's horrible rebranding. This is the core segment for today's episode. We're going inside the system now. Teachers, parents, students, 3 stories, 3 failures, same curriculum. Let's start with the teachers, because they're the ground zero. Under CBC, teachers are required to carry out continuous assessments for every learner. That means designing practical assignments, maintaining individual portfolios, marking frequent project work, and uploading assessment data to the NEC digital portal. For every single child in a class that in many public schools exceeds 60 plus students or children. Think about that for a second. A teacher with 63 students perhaps must individually assess each child's competency across multiple learning areas, maintain documentation of that assessment, compile it into a format that can be uploaded to the national system, and still somehow find time to actually do the teaching that she's supposed to be doing. A 2024 study on the CBC implementation noted that teachers' workload, with a mountain of records and reports they must prepare, was actively impeding the quality of actual lesson delivery. Assessment paperwork was eating into so much of the teaching time, and the tool designed to improve learning was now preventing learning from ever happening. Here's a story. I want to paint a picture based on the documented reality in multiple Kenyan schools, drawn from research and reporting across 2024 and 2025. Call her Mwalimu Anjiko. She teaches at a public primary school in a semi-urban center. Somewhere in Kino, perhaps. Her class has 65 learners. She was trained to teach under 844 herself, and her CBC retraining consisted of a workshop that lasted a few days, run by a facilitator who was himself learning the material in real time. Every time, she must administer school-based assessments, score them, using competency rubrics, enter data on the NEC CBA portal, and prepare for projects and practicals that NEC uploads for grade 4s and 5s. In January 2025, NEC announced that schools must administer, score, and upload the assessment outcomes for all learners within strict deadlines, with a penalty of 500 shillings per project uploaded late. 500 bob for late uploads. In a school that sometimes can't even afford chalk. Anjiko is not lazy. Anjiko is not resistant to change. Anjiko is a professional who has been handed a jet engine and told to install it on a bicycle. And this brings me to what I call the DY engineering principle of Kenyan policy. CBC is a system that was pushed to production without any QA or QC testing. No beta, no pilot at scale, no stress level, no stress tests. Just deploy national-wide and pray. Now, let's talk about the parent. And this is where the anger is most concentrated, and for good reason that is. The CBC's policy on parental engagement was supposed to mean that parents take an active role in supporting their child's learning. In practice, it has meant something very different. It has meant that the state transferred a portion of the actual education workload directly onto households without any training or any compensation. Neither do they acknowledge that most Kenyan parents are working full-time jobs that do not allow them to come home and co-teach grade 5 environmental activities. And you can ask me, man, it's absolutely difficult. The evidence for this is not anecdotal. It is documented. Members of Parliament in the Education and Research Committee raised the issue formally, noting that parents were complaining about the overwhelming homework burden. They directed KICD to issue clear guidelines on how assignments should be handled. In some private schools, The learners were being asked to bring reams of printing paper, more than 10 textbooks per subject, and additional stationery. And here is the class dimension that matters. When a parent from Karen hires a tutor or uses home printer, or has a stay-at-home spouse who can supervise such projects, the system works. When a parent from Kibera works 2 informal jobs and comes home at 8 p.m. to find a project brief she doesn't even understand, the system completely fails. Same curriculum, radically different outcomes. Based on the documented experiences of a Kenyan parent reported in media and research, a father, and I'll call him, Baba Amani. He works as a security guard, night shift. His wife sells vegetables at a local market. They have 3 children, the eldest of which is in grade 7 under CBC. The youngest is in grade 2. In one term, the grade 7 child came home with a project requirement that included printing full color images, building a model of the solar system, and preparing a digital presentation. A digital presentation in a household that owns one phone between both parents. Baba Amani went to the cyber cafe. He paid for printing. He paid someone to format the presentation onto a flash drive the school didn't provide. And by the end of the term, he had spent money on school projects that he had never budgeted for, or he had budgeted for food. Dr. Osborne Mabalu, the former National Organizing Secretary of the Kenya of National Parents Association, put it plainly in January of 2026. The burden of this education system has shifted heavily to households, both financially and academically. Parents are supposed or expected to support learning at home, despite lacking the necessary skills. Remember, some of these projects require technical know-how, and our kids are supposed to compete against parents who are well-to-do, who are either engineers or some other way. And when I am unable to be able to offer that to my son or my daughter, whose failure is it? There's an assumption that all parents understand the curriculum. Yet not so many actually do. That's not parental engagement. That's cost transfer. The state designed a curriculum it could not fund and handed the bill to the people it was supposed to actually serve. This is insane. And then there are the students themselves. The people this was all supposed to be for. The kids, our kids. Your kids and my kids. In December 2025, over 1.13 million learners received their first ever KJSEA results. Which is, let me be able to break it down, the Kenya Junior School Education Assessment. This was the pioneer cohort, the first generation of Kenyans to go through the CBC from start to finish at the junior secondary level. The results were reported in competency bands rather than the marks. No rankings, no merit lists. Students were placed into senior school pathways, STEM, social sciences, arts and sports, based on their performance and preferences. Education Cabinet Secretary Julius Ogamba announced that about 59% of candidates demonstrated potential for STEM. 47% demonstrated their capabilities in social sciences, and 49 also did for arts and sports. And immediately, confusion erupted. Parents didn't understand the grading bands. The placement processes faced allegations of error and misplacement. In some regions, initial reporting rates to grade 10 were as low as 30%. Many families still struggle to understand what pathways mean and what subject clusters actually involve. And even worse, what the home support role actually requires of them. Based on reporting from Education Analysis in early 2026, a grade 9 student in a rural county, let's call him Brian. Yeah, Brio. Brian went through junior secondary in a school that was originally a primary school. His JSS classmates were held in the same compound, taught by some of the teachers whom taught him in grade 6. The school lacked a science laboratory. Practical STEM learning, which CBC heavily emphasizes, was largely theoretical for him. When KJSEA results came out, Brayo was placed in a STEM pathway at a county school he had never visited. His parents received the placement digitally. They don't have reliable internet. When they finally accessed the information through the school, they didn't understand what STEM pathway meant or what subjects Brian would actually study. Brayo's classmates from a well-resourced private school in Nairobi received the same pathways. The same pathway placements. The classmates had spent 3 years in a school with a functional lab, a computer room, and teachers trained specifically in CBC pedology. Brian spent 3 years in a school where junior secondary was bolted on a primary school because the government ran out of time to build dedicated facilities. Same assessment, same pathway, completely different preparation. This is not a system. It's a lottery disguised as a curriculum. You imagine what's supposed to do. Maybe your son or your daughter, and you're not from a very well-privileged society or family, is good in the sciences, but because he's never gotten the experience to be in a proper lab, they choose him for an arts, and nothing to say arts are bad, but for an arts thing. Then he never lives to his total, full capability or ability. Imagine. Why? Because he never had the same resources that someone else from an upmarket primary school had. And you wonder why our members of parliament do not take their kids to any of these CBC nonsense. This is a segment I need you to sit with. Because everything I've described so far, the teacher workload, the parent burden, the student confusion, all of it hits differently depending on one thing: money. CBC, despite its intention, has become an equality amplifier, not because it was designed to be one, but because it was deployed into a profoundly unequal landscape and then left to run on the assumption that all schools, that all households, and all communities start from the same place, which, as you know, as I know, is absolutely hogwash. And because all people are different and we have different cadre in the society. They're the well-to-do, they're the people who are average, and there are those who are not fortunate enough to have the very best of life. Think about what CBC actually requires of a household for a child to succeed. Number 1, time. A parent or a caregiver available to supervise projects, guide learning, and engage with the school. Secondly, space, a study area, a table, a quiet environment. Thirdly, devices, access to a phone, computer, a printer, or digital for all the digital assignments. Fourth, literacy, a parent who can read and understand the curriculum requirements well enough to actually help. Think about that. In a middle-class home in Lavington, those things exist. In an informal settlement in Mathare, they don't. Same curriculum, same assessment criteria. The curriculum doesn't adjust for the fact that the playing field is not level. It just pretends that the field, sadly, doesn't exist. Let me give you a side-by-side. Child A attends a high-end private school in Nairobi. Class size, 20 students. The school has a robotics club, a modern science laboratory, a computer room with reliable internet, and teachers who are trained for CBC through a program the school funded privately. When the project is assigned, the school provides materials. Parents are sent a detailed brief. Tutors are available. The child's project is polished, professional, and genuinely reflects learning. Child B, on the other hand, attends a public school in a rural sub-county. Class size, 68 students. The school was originally built for primary education and now houses JSS classes in the same compound. There is no laboratory. The school is among The school is among the 1,600 public secondary schools that lack functional labs, according to educational reporting from early 2026. The school has 4 working computers for the entire institution. When a project is assigned, parent receives a WhatsApp message with minimal instructions and is expected to source materials independently. Both children are assessed on the same competency rubric. Both children's scores contribute to their pathway placements. Both children are told that the system is fair. It's not fair. And the data actually proves it. The numbers. Let's talk about the numbers. The Auditor-General's report released in July 2025 exposed a staggering 117 billion shillings shortfall in capitation funding to public schools over 4 financial years. Secondary schools bore the largest deficit of 71 billion. Junior secondary schools at 31 billion and primary schools at 14 billion. This is not a marginal gap. This is chasm. This means schools are running CBC on budgets that cannot cover basic operation, let alone the ambitious practical learning, the curriculum desires or demands. The Brookings Institution's 2025 report on Kenya's CBC found that the consistent and equitable development of competencies is constrained by gaps in teacher preparation, limited access to learning resources, and digital tools, especially in arid and semi-arid regions. Imagine. Just think about that. And we're not even making you think about going too far. I'm talking about before we even see the damning part of this, if you move like 100 kilometers off of Nairobi, you start seeing the struggle. Now imagine if you're in a semi-arid or in an arid region of this country. When we're talking Mandera, or we're talking somewhere in Samburu, what are they going through? What? Inadequate infrastructure and varying levels of parental engagement. Private schools have adjusted more seamlessly to CBC demands. Public schools operate under significant systemic constraints. The Daily Nation analysis in December 2025 drew a direct parallel. Just as patients are frequently referred from public hospitals due to inadequate diagnostic equipment, learners are referred elsewhere to access essential learning experiences. In both cases, professional expertise exists, but institutional capacity lags behind policy aspirations. So, when someone tells you CBC is working, ask them, working for who? Because the answer right now is it's working for people who could afford to educate their children regardless of what system was going to be in place. For everyone else, it's an extra burden with a new freaking name. What I want to do here is give both systems a fair autopsy. No nostalgia, no vibes, just forensic comparison. Let's start with what 844 got right, because it got some things absolutely right. The structures were clear. 8 years of primary, 4 years of secondary, and 4 years of university. Parents understood it. Teachers were trained for it. And progression was predictable. You knew what your child was studying, when they'd be examined, and what the stakes were actually. The parent's role, while imperfect, was largely defined. Pay school fees, buy the uniform, show up for Parents' Day, and you were not expected to be a co-teacher. You were not expected to build models at night. The system did not assume you had a printer. But what 844 got wrong was devastating. We need to be honest about this, because the problems with 844 are the reason CBC actually exists. First, the exam obsession. Under 844, a child's entire future hinged on KCPE and KCSE. One exam, one day, one result. Children were not learning. They were preparing to pass exams. Schools were not educating in any form, shape, or way. They were drilling for scores. The system concentrated on only 2 types of intelligence. Linguistic and logical, mathematical, and ignored every goddamn thing after that. Secondly, the cheating economy. Exam leakages became endemic. In 2015 to 2016, the scandals were so severe that when the government cracked down under Cabinet Secretary Matiang'i and NEC Chairperson Magoha, the number of straight A's candidates dropped from nearly 2,000 to 143. Schools that had been producing over 100 straight A's suddenly produced a handful. We're talking one or two. The fraud had been so systemic, parents were paying what they called facilitation fees into secret accounts and were assured their children would receive top grades regardless of actual performance. Third, the tuition economy. With so much riding on the final exam, holiday tuition became an industry. Children lost their breaks. Parents bore the cost. Teachers were stretched beyond their contracts. It was a system that officially ended at the school gate, but unofficially demanded a year-round commitment and expenditure. Fourth, the failure factory. The system concentrated on identifying winners and discarding everyone else. If you didn't make the cut for a national school, you went to a district school and often had to fund your own tuition. And even graduates who made it through that system struggled. There are documented accounts of mass failure among students entering medicine, engineering, and architecture at university because their secondary education taught them to memorize and never, and I mean absolutely never, to understand. So CBC on paper addresses almost every failure of 844. It reduces exam dependency through continuous assessments. It creates pathways for different types of intelligence. It values practical skill alongside academic knowledge. It tries to end the culture of ranking children like products. But what it has actually delivered, or in practice, CBC has introduced its own category of failures. The cost shift from state to household. The confusion among all of the stakeholders, parents, teachers, students, the profound inequality on the implementation between private and public schools, between urban and rural, between funded and forgotten. And here's the key comparison that people miss. 844's failures were concentrated at the point of assessment. CBC failures, they're distributed across the entire learning experience. You don't just fail at the end under CBC. You struggle from day one. If your school, your home, and your county do not have the resources the system assumes you have. This scenario is documented across Kenyan households and represents a reality of millions of families during the transition period. A parent has two children. The older one is now in Form 3 under 844 and is preparing for KCSE. The younger one is in grade 8 under CBC. The older child's education is stressful. Yes, there is tuition during holidays. There is pressure for the final exam, but the parent knows the rules. Buy the past papers, pay the tuition, hope for the best for your child. The younger child's education is a different kind of stressful. The parent doesn't fully understand the assessment system. Projects require materials the school doesn't provide. The teachers seem overwhelmed and unsure. The pathway systems looms ahead and nobody has clearly explained what it means or how it affects university admissions. Same parent, same household, same love for both children, but navigating two completely different educational languages at the same time. This is a transition Kenya imposed on millions of families without adequate communication, training, or support. Now, let's get clinical. This segment is not about emotions, it's about engineering. If CBC were a product launched by a company, this would be the failure review. No blame, just diagnosis. Failure number 1, policy rollout gap. The curriculum was designed at the policy level by curriculum specialists and educational theorists. It was rolled out at the implementation level by teachers who hadn't been adequately retrained, in schools that hadn't been adequately resourced, to parents who had never been adequately informed. The distance between the KCID policy document and the classroom in Turkana is not a gap, it's a canyon. Failure number 2, funding mismatch. CBC requires more money per learner than 844, more assessment infrastructure, more teaching material, more specialized classrooms, more teachers. Kenya spends approximately 5.1% of its GDP on education, above the global average. But the 117 billion shilling capitation shortfalls tells you that the money is either insufficient or not reaching the schools. You cannot run a first world curriculum on third world budget and expect first world results. Failure number 3, infrastructure absence. By 2026, at least 1,600 public secondary schools still lacked functional laboratories. The government announced plans to construct 2,600 new labs starting January 2025, including 2,000 virtual labs. But construction has progressed so slowly. Junior secondary schools are domiciled within primary schools' compounds, a decision that exposed massive infrastructure gaps because primary schools were never designed to host secondary or high school level facilities. Only about 48% of junior school learners have access to those freaking labs. You are teaching a STEM-focused curriculum in a school where the science lab is a theoretical concept. Failure number 4, political churn. CBC was conceived under one government, modified by a presidential working party under another, rebranded to CBE, and now is being implemented yet by another set of officials. Each political transition introduces new priorities, new consultants, new committees, and the new confusion. Education policy in Kenya is not insulated from politics. It is a subsidiary of politics, and children are paying the ultimate cost of that instability. Failure number 5, communication failure. This may be the most consequential failure of all. At no point has the government effectively communicated to Kenyan parents what CBC actually requires of them, how assessment works, what pathways mean, or how this connects to university admission and employment. The KJSEA results in December 2025 proved this. Parents didn't understand competency bands. They didn't understand pathway placements. The KICD CEO himself acknowledged that media coverage on subject by subject performance was causing anxiety among parents and learners. When the people your system is supposed to serve do not understand how your system works, then your system is trash. Or your polite words, your system has a communication problem. And in Kenya, a communication problem is a trust problem. And a trust problem is a political problem. And we know how that ends. Now, we follow the money carefully. No conspiracies, just incentives. Every time a national curriculum changes, a massive economic engine activates. New textbooks must be written, approved, printed, and distributed. New training workshop must be organized. New consultants must be hired. New assessment systems must be built. This is not inherently corrupt. Curriculum changes costs money. But the question is, who freaking benefits from the spending? And is the spending reaching the actual classroom? Kenya has over 106 registered publishers. Over the 6 years of CBC implementation, publishers distributed more than 200 million books to public schools. The procurement and distribution is coordinated by KICD on behalf of the Ministry of Education. Publishers submit manuscripts. KICD evaluates and approves them, and the government contracts publishers to print and distribute. Here is where it gets interesting. As of late 2025, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers reported that textbook publishers and printers were owed 11 billion shillings by the government. A debt accumulated since 2022 for printing grade 8 and 9 books. 11 billion. That debt has crippled operations. And according to CAM, put the production of grade 10 textbooks in jeopardy ahead of the January 2026 transition to senior school. The pioneer CBC class entering grade 10 required 7 million copies of textbooks and literacy works across 35 different titles from 21 publishing firms, all that were supposed to be delivered before schools reopened. The KICD CEO publicly appealed to publishers to prioritize delivery despite the unpaid debts, assuring them that government would eventually pay. Here's the exact public assurance to the publishers. The government has never failed to pay. So let me understand this. The government designed a curriculum that requires new books for every grade. It contracted publishers to print those books. It then failed to pay the publishers for years. And now it's asking the publishers to please keep printing anyway because children need the books. This is not a procurement system. This is an IOU disguised as an education policy. Then there's the training economy. Every time the curriculum changes, teachers need retraining. Retraining requires facilitators, venues, material, and per diems. KICD owns terms of reference for CBC involve consulting firms hired by year-long engagements that are at undisclosed rates. The Kenya Education Management Institute ran training programs for the head teachers. The Teacher Service Commission conducted multiple rounds of upskilling workshops. The government hired over 30,000 new teachers in 2023 alone for JSS. Each of these is a budget line. Each budget line is an opportunity for both genuine investment and extractive procurement. I'm not alleging specific corruption here. I'm pointing to the structural to a structural incentive. The more complex and frequently revised a curriculum is, the more the money flows through the education supply chain. Whether that money reaches the classroom or evaporates in the chain is a question the Auditor-General's 117 billion shilling finding should prompt us to ask very, very loudly. All right, I'll spend more than an hour telling you what is broken. If I stopped here, I'd be doing what every Kenyan talk show does. Diagnose brilliantly, but prescribe nothing. So let's prescribe. And these are not vibes. These are structural reforms tied to specific failures we've already documented. Reform number 1, drastically reduce the assessment load. If you have 65 students in a class and a teacher who is supposed to individually assess each one continuously, you have designed a system that will collapse under its own paperwork. Reduce the number of formal assessments per term. Simplify the portfolio requirements. Make the digital upload system genuinely user-friendly and provide reliable internet access to every school that is expected to use it. If NEC is going to fine school 500 shillings per late upload, NEC must first guarantee that every school has a functioning internet access. Reform number 2, proper sustained teacher retraining. Tied to what failure? Teachers not adequately prepared for CBC pedology. A 5-day workshop is not retraining. It's an introduction. Teachers need continuous professional development, not a one-off event, but ongoing structured school-level mentorship. The Brookings report specifically recommended expanding and decentralizing high-quality continuous professional development tailored to CBC. The government should also urgently address national teacher deficit, which the Teacher Service Commission estimates is over 98,000. You can't run a school-centered curriculum when the teachers to student ratio exceeds 1 to 70. Reform number 3, establish and enforce minimum resource standards per school. Tied to failure, that is infrastructure inequality between schools. No school should be assessed on CBC delivery if it does not meet the minimum standards for laboratory access, classroom capacity, and digital connectivity, and teacher material. If a government cannot bring every school up to standard, it must adjust the assessment criteria to reflect what each school actually has. Anything else is punishing children for government's failure to invest. Reform number 4, cap and subsidize parent cost. Tied to the failure about cost of transfer from state to household. If a curriculum requires projects and these projects require materials, the school must provide the materials. Period. The 2024 textbook price cap was a start, but project costs, printing costs, and the hidden fees that CBC has introduced must be addressed directly. Either fund schools to provide these materials or redesign the assessment so they do not require materials that parents can't afford. Reform number 5, make JSS and senior school pathways genuinely clear. It is tied to student and parent confusion of pathway placements. The December 2025 KJACA release release proved that the pathway system is not understood by the people it actually affects. The government must launch a sustained multi-language, multi-platform communication campaign that explains it in simple human terms, what each pathway involves, what subjects are studied, what career options each opens, and how it connects to university or TVET admissions. Parents should not be learning about pathway from WhatsApp forwards. They should be learning from government in their language with enough time to prepare. Reform number 6, honest communication. Always, this is tied to the erosion of public trust. So, stop rebranding. Stop renaming the curriculum every time there's a political pressure. CBC to CBE is not a reform. It's marketing. What parents need is not a new name. They need honesty about what is working and what isn't, and what the government is doing about it. The Presidential Working Party reported, the committees met, the consultants consulted. Now implement and tell people what you are freaking implementing in languages they actually understand, with timelines they can be able to actually track. Let me learn this. CBC did not fail because it was ambitious. Kenya has never been short on ambition. We launched a digital literacy program and shipped tablets to schools that didn't have electricity. We built a railway and forgot to build the stations. We write beautiful policies and then dare reality to keep up. CBC is failing because Kenya keeps launching national dreams without funding the boring parts and make them work. The classrooms, the teachers, the textbooks, the toilets, the labs, the communication. To every parent listening, I see you. You are not confused because you are not stupid or foolish. You are confused because no one explained any of this to you. You're not failing your children. The system is failing to support you in all the ways it requires. Demand better. Use your voice, organize, show up at school board meetings, ask your MP what they know about CBC. I guarantee most of them cannot explain the pathway system any better than you can. To the leaders and to the teachers, you're carrying a system that was not designed for the conditions you work in. That is not your failure. That is a policy failure. But you are the ones in the classroom with these children. And the children need you now more than ever. Keep teaching, keep caring, and keep telling the truth about what you need loudly, publicly, until someone actually listens. To the policymakers, the cabinet secretaries, the KICD officials, the NEC administrators, the TSC leadership. If you are serious about CBC or CBE or whatever you want to call it next month, then freaking fund it, staff it, bill for it, communicate it, and stop assuming that ambition is the same thing as implementation. Because right now, the only consistent implementation of Kenya's education policy are the parents gluing things together at midnight and the teachers filling assessment forms by torchlight. That's been the Kenyan week that was. Receipts of our vibes, always.